Jamie from thedailyinfusion.com. I'm really excited to be joined by Elizabeth McGann today. She's an Integrative Nutritional Counselor at Behive of Healing Medical Center here in Los Angeles, California, a wonderful holistic healing community really dedicated to empowering people and to be living really the most optimal wellness they could achieve. And so today, Elizabeth and I are going to be talking about some things I haven't quite touched on, but are very related to things that I always talk about, which is moving through trauma and the ways that can manifest in our lives and how best to deal with all the ways that they can manifest. And today's topic is going to be centered around food and some of the addictions that in relationship we can develop with food that maybe aren't the healthiest ways of relating, and how that is related to the traumas we experienced earlier on in life. So I'm just going to hand it over to Elizabeth to tell a little bit more about her story, how she got involved in this area, and what we can really do, and to highlight if this is maybe something that we need to look at inside of ourselves. So thank you so much for being here, Elizabeth.
Oh, thanks for having me, Jamie. It's an honor and a privilege to be here today. And I think so many women and men, but women really suffer from a wonky relationship with food, for lack of a better word. Disordered eating, thinking about it way too much, controlling, restricting, it just taking up way too much bandwidth in your head. And, food and food addiction and disordered eating is a spectrum. And I think if you're a woman in the United States, or anywhere in the world nowadays with media, you suffer from it a bit with body image issues, et cetera. So I think it's an issue that affects so many of us, and it certainly has affected me personally. So I understand it from both a personal and a professional level.
Could you tell us a little bit more about your experience with that and how it led you into this career of really assisting and supporting others who could relate with their experience of what this might feel like?
Sure, yeah. So, again, my story is no different than probably a lot of women's story. And it may be a little different in terms, I think mine kind of went into more of an addictive piece, but it started off as me as a little girl with my mom being really critical of me. And I love my mom, but being really critical of me and my size and my weight at a really young age. She was, worried about her own weight. And as a sensitive person, I really internalized that. And in terms of the trauma piece, I grew up in a household where, there was some, fighting, and there were events that were traumatizing. And my definition of trauma is anything that traumatizes you. So, it doesn't have to be the largest event. If it traumatizes you, it's a trauma. And I certainly, as a sensitive person, things affected me deeply. And I found myself at an early age using food as a way to cope. And I think of food now as, my primary addiction, it was. I've healed that. I have a great relationship with food, but at a young age, it started off as using food, as sugar, as a way to medicate my feelings, to deal with the things that scared me, that traumatized me. And it worked. It was a way of numbing myself. And I think most addictive tendencies are it's a coping mechanism that works until it stops working.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you mentioned that piece about, it's a lot of the people I can speak with, they get into this mindset of comparing traumas with other people. Like, well, mine's
Sure.
not that bad, so they'll minimize their experience, or they'll really dramatize it. And it's like, well, there's, like you said, a whole spectrum of things, and I don't discriminate against pain, because you can have a physical disease that someone else might say, oh, that's an awful thing to have. At least, I'm only feeling sad some of the time. But that emotional pain could be wreaking havoc on your body quietly, and you don't even know it. And then you could have these little outlets, like with the food, that you might think are kind of innocent, but it's coming from a root that's actually quite painful inside of you, and that's not something to minimize ever.
Yeah,
So
it's true.
They that call kind of comes up to be acknowledged from us. And, so what are some of the signs that someone could look for to say, okay, maybe that sounds kind of familiar, and maybe I didn't think I had an issue with food, but what would that even look like if...
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we've heard about emotional eating, which I think everyone does to some degree. And food is a wonderful, nurturing thing to do that does give comfort. There's a word that comfort food is used a lot, you know. And but I think it can be taken. Emotional eating goes into a different spectrum. So when you find yourself, you get into a fight with your boyfriend, and you're eating a pint of Haagen-Dazs. That's emotional eating, and that can be taken even too far. And so, how much you're doing that, if perhaps it's getting in the way of your health goals, you're maybe wanting to lose weight, and you find yourself often going into food that ultimately makes you feel badly at the end of it, right? So it's that hit of, oh, this feels good, but then there's the guilt and remorse that happens after you've eaten whatever, and it's consistent. So my definition of addiction is anything that you continue to do despite negative consequences. Anything you continue to do despite negative consequences. And that is if food starts to fall into that category, where you're eating and for emotional reasons to medicate feelings or to numb out, and then you start to have negative consequences. Your energy gets low, your health goals don't go where you want them to, you're gaining weight, you're feeling badly about yourself. That's now moved into what I consider the addictive spectrum. And that's where the solution can come in, which we can talk about in a minute. But other signs and symptoms that like food is taking up, it might be more of an issue for you, is that how much time during the day are you thinking about food? How much bandwidth does that take up in your whole being? And if you were to free that up a little bit, what other things could you be doing? Like, if food is taking up so much of your bandwidth, it's kind of a shame. Women spend way too much time thinking about these things, and if that were just reduced, you could be thinking about other things. So how much time are you thinking about it? Does it feel a little obsessive? Are you controlling a lot, or is there a lot of restriction? Is there a lot of shame and guilt if you're not able to hold yourself to the standard? Those are basically what I would say.
Right. And that hypervigilance is really where that link to the trauma comes in, because it's all about this refusal to really feel the suppressed emotions that we have going on based from those old wounds that we might still have within us, but we might not even be conscious of, because a lot of people might have done a lot of self-work and gone to a lot of therapy, and yet still maybe something comes out in the form of this almost more acceptable way of coping, which is, like you said, that pint of Haagen-Dazs, which we see glorified in comedy and films and all this stuff. Like, it's expected, oh, let's go eat a bunch of bonbons because something bad happened, and I can cry over my pint of ice cream, and it's made fun of and it's kind of taken lightly. But really, that's a form of avoiding that original wound, that hurt that's going on. And the further we get from that emotional processing, the more we reach out for these substances, whatever it is, whether it's a person, whether it's food, whether it's actual like drugs or alcohol. These are all avoidance techniques. So
absolutely.
that hypervigilance and feeling the need to kind of control your emotions in that way and avoid them is a very big sign, I think, to be aware of.
Definitely. And it's very interesting to see what happens when you put down the thing that you would escape into, for example. So if you're avoiding your feelings, if you're like, okay, I'm going to work on this food thing, we can talk about what that would even look like. And say your food drug of choice is sugar or cookies or ice cream or whatever, and you decide you're going to put that down. Then the emotions come up, and you're unable to escape into the Haagen-Dazs, and you're just left with the feelings why you overate in the first place or abused food in the first place. That's where the work really begins.
Right. And then the more often we engage in that behavior with any kind of addictive behavior, then we get that layer of shame that comes in, like you said, the shame and guilt. And that's now overlaid on top of the emotion that was already there. And so now we kind of have to dig and process through both of those things. We might do that, but then the pain kind of comes back, and it's like, all right, so what would you suggest for someone who's now become aware that they're in this bit of a cycle? I want to really get a hold of this in a healthy way, so I'm not too controlling about it, but I can move through this over time at a pace that I can digest. What would you suggest would be a good first step out of this kind of cycle?
Yeah, great question. So the first step is admitting that it's a problem. Now, the first step is coming to terms with the fact that you got this thing you do that's sabotaging yourself, whether you're carrying around 20 extra pounds, or your energy is really low, or you just are really frustrated with yourself that you can't get past this thing. It's admitting that it's an issue is step one. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Step two is realizing that you don't necessarily have to do it by yourself. So reaching out for someone to help you, whether that's a therapist or a friend or a 12-step group or anyone that kind of understands and maybe has been there that can give you guidance, realizing that you don't have to do it by yourself, that there's community, and it's very important to find a community of people that have been there and can kind of mentor you. And the next step is a spiritual step, ultimately, and that can be religious, but when I say spirituality, I'm not necessarily speaking about religion. I'm talking about a power greater than yourself, a way to connect with source energy, with nature. It could be a 12-step group, just a group of people. You don't have to believe in anything formal, but people that often recover from disordered eating, trauma, full-blown addiction, there's a higher power piece that they reconnect with, and that hole that they've been looking to fill with food or whatever that is, the behavior, is now brought in. It's filled with a source greater than themselves, and that fills them up from the inside. Mm-hmm. It's a more primary nourishment. Mm-hmm. And that tends to, then you don't need to look for food to do what it's really not here to do, other than nourish your body and give you energy.
Right. Yeah. I know that there's something I watched recently where they said the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection. Because really that's the antidote, right? And that connection starts, like you said, connect to the truth in yourself, and then that connection with others, that, in that humility, because you're getting honest, and that's where the healing happens. It's a very humbling place to be, but that's where real truth can be experienced in real intimacy, which is what I think deep down we are all really craving. Is just, we want that acknowledgement, but we're so ashamed of the feelings that kind of we're holding. And so we isolate, and that's where the addiction happens, in that isolation, in that secrecy, because that's what the shame tells us to do. So if you think about it logically, well, the opposite of that would be, yes, connect with the beautiful world that's outside with us, to see there is so much more than what you feel you're holding within. That's everything. It's not. There's so much hope, and so much that to relate with others, that we're not really struggling alone when we might feel that way, which then kind of feeds back into that addiction more and
Absolutely.
more.
Yeah. I love that. Well said. Yeah. Yes.
So you mentioned something just about finding the primary source of food. So
yes.
Can you explain a little bit what you mean by primary source of food?
Absolutely. So one of the things I talk about is the difference between primary food and secondary food. Primary food and secondary food. Secondary food is the food is food. It's what you're actually eating. It's food. Primary food, and why it's primary, is not the food. It's your whole life. And so it's all the parts of your life that make you feel whole. So for example, it could be your creativity, your career, your education, your relationships, your social life, your home environment. There's so many things. Your exercise, all the ways, your confidence, all the things that truly, if you were to nourish the different areas, you would be filled up on a more primary level. That's your more primary nourishment. And oftentimes when we see an imbalance in the secondary food, the secondary nourishment manifesting as, controlling, restricting, binge eating, emotional eating, wherever you are with that, the shame and remorse that comes from that, there's often, it's an indicator that there's an imbalance in the primary food. When I sit down with patients and clients, one of the first conversations that I have when I see that there's an imbalance in the secondary food, in the actual food that they're eating, I always know that there's a deeper conversation to be had. And on deeper inspection, we can find that for example, they feel disconnected, they're isolated, or they have very low self-esteem, and or they need to grow more, they need to in their spirituality, or the trauma, or we can just go down the line, yeah, and we'll find it. And by nourishing on the more primary level, it helps to then the food tends to take care of itself because it's not really ever about the food, right?
Yep, that's so true and well said. And so now you're at Behive of Healing, which people are walking through those doors with a myriad of issues going on with their bodies. And so what have you noticed for those people? Because a lot of the people that have watched my videos know that I've gone through this chronic illness, chronic pain journey. What's the connection? Have you seen any connection with those who have gone through chronic medical conditions, and then how there might be that hypervigilance around the food based off of that experience with the healing the body and maybe not being able to eat and having to restrict because of their medical issues in certain ways? Can you talk about that a little?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
So a Beehive of Healing is a beautiful integrative medical center just outside of Los Angeles in Agoura Hills, and we work with so many people. And Dr. Sadeghi and Dr. Sammy and Dr. Gross do such a wonderful job of leading the medical team there. And I've been blessed to be a part of that team as a practitioner. And we see so many people with so many different stories, from deep illness to people that are just looking to maintain their wellness. And there is a common theme of how food fits in. And if they have gone through a deep medical treatment where they have to eat in a very regimented way, it, as you said, it can lead to a controlling that goes with the territory. So certainly that can happen, and having to be hypervigilant about your food for medical reasons is a little different than what I'm talking about in terms of the controlling that just is for no other reason. If you're someone who doesn't have medical conditions and you're just super controlling about your food, that's a little different than for a medical reason. But the solution is always the same once you kind of are in treatment for the medical condition. The solution is always to go deeper and to understand the mind-body-spirit connection. Before something manifests as a full-blown dis-ease, there's always an underlying energetic emotional piece that's there. And when people are willing to even explore that possibility, whether they believe it or not, if they're willing to even explore that possibility and see how stress or emotion or a disconnection with yourself or your higher power or your family could manifest as some sort of precursor to set you up for a disease process, when you start to see the links and you add in amazing medical care and a sound nutritional plan and all the ways that you start to take care of yourself, that's when your healing really begins, because you understand it on the both primary level and the secondary level.
Oh, totally. I know for me personally, when I was first getting the beginning of this kind of downward trend in my health, I had to do an elimination diet of so many different things, starting with like the gluten and all that stuff. And that was actually the first time I noticed my emotional issues around food, because when I first had to take away all these things, that's when I was like, all the feelings of shame and like, oh, I can't go out now. I can't relate with people. I can't connect with people, what it really comes down to. I can't do the things with how you connect over meals. And now I have to it's like everything in my life had to change because of that. And so the restriction feeling, and then I have to go, wait a minute. This isn't the first time I've actually felt restricted like this before. This is actually about something much larger than I even realized. And I could start to trace it back. It happened long before that. So like you said, those medical conditions, yeah, they manifest kind of physically later on sometimes for us to see what's been happening very slowly over time to kind of hit you like that. And when you have that kind of crises, that's the same mode of reminding you what it feels like. You're in a trauma now. You're in another trauma. It's triggering all of that stuff for you to see. And how do you deal with it in a way that's like, all right, like you said, it might not all get done at once, but you slowly develop the pieces. Everybody has a piece of the puzzle, and you find who resonates with you to find that support for you. And for those people who might not be able to afford all of those resources at once, you take it one step at a time. I didn't do everything all at once or overnight, certainly,
Mm-hmm.
and it was not linear. And that's like any healing, any healing with addiction or healing your body, whatever it is. Not a lot of it is going to be totally logical, linear. Like, I want to reiterate that this is not something like, oh, yeah, you realize this is the issue, and then you do this and you're fine. It's a constant staying connected to you thing.
Yes. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And I like to say like layers of an onion. You know,
Yeah.
you do some work, and then the next layer is revealed, and the next layer, and patience, and a day at a time. Yeah.
Mm.
And you bring up a good point in terms of solution. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money. There's so many resources available for people. And one of my mentors told me that the three components of a successful recovery from anything are community, like-minded community of people that understand it, the higher power piece, and that could be nature, and it could be your family, it could be anything that's not you, just reaching out and bringing in more energy and not doing it all by yourself. But it absolutely could be a more formalized spiritual or religious practice. And the third piece being service, being of service, and kind of coming out of that self-centered focus and realizing that there's a whole world out there, and to be in the energy of service, of contribution, and what can I do for you and how can I help. And when those three things are there, community, service, higher power, people tend to recover from whatever's going on. And that can be found in a 12-step group, which is free. That can be found in a yoga studio. That can be found at an integrative medical center. That can be found with therapy. That can point them to support groups. There's so many ways to do it that can hit different points of entry in terms of your finances. So I think that no matter what, there's hope, and finding people that have been there and understand, and you can just be honest with, that's where the healing begins.
Yeah, people, we want to relate as human beings. We want to relate. We're meant to connect. And when we find that connection within ourselves, we can do it more deeply on the outside. And it's really about, like you said, that movement. Even if you can't, like when I was in bed and stuff and I couldn't exercise or do any of those things, I thought about that and it felt bad. But then I was like, you know what? Movement doesn't have to mean actually like killing yourself in a gym if that's not where you're at right now or you feel you can't do that right now. There could be an inner movement, writing, creating things. Those are all ways of getting movement happening in your body. The point is we want to get those emotions and sensations moving so that we can have that acknowledgement of them. And that's how they start to heal. And we're able to let things go a little bit more because we're fluid now. We're getting a little bit more flexible, less rigid with ourselves. It's that movement piece that I find is so key, that a lot of people can focus on the exercise piece when they're obsessed with their bodies and that stuff. But it's really just about getting in that energy of movement and allowing that movement to occur, that process to happen.
No, I love that. That's so beautiful.
Yeah, at least
Yeah.
that's the way that I'm seeing it now. I always kind of change, like this is where I am now, but that's part of my own healing, right? Is just to know, to
Sure.
allow that flexibility, to notice these things that bring us into a certain space, and to allow ourselves the flexibility to shift as we heal.
Mm.
And that this primary source of food might have fed you more a month ago, and now you're shifting more towards you want to go painting instead of going to the 12-step group, or it can look like so many different things.
Yes, I love that. And I love that you talked also about movement and the body, creativity, but the body too is like understanding that the body holds your healing as well. And the more you can get into your body and kind of bypass the mind where most of our problems exist and drop into the body, there's a deep healing that can happen there too, and a movement.
Yeah, and that's where
Energetic.
yeah, it's totally, it's where the truth really is. And I notice if we get into a state where we're avoiding our body, we can overeat in that position and then literally pad ourselves to prevent that connection to our own bodies, which is just another thing to examine. If you feel like I'm gaining weight, I'm getting bigger, I'm in this cycle, well, what is it that I'm avoiding in me? It's
Mm-hmm.
always going to be something deep in your body. It has nothing to do with the shape of your body, but we think it does.
Yeah,
That's the mind.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, what would you say, just in terms of, we'll wrap up, when it comes to really learning to develop that connection to your body and the emotions when it comes to fueling and what shifting that relationship to food as that fuel and what's
Hmm.
really fueling us? What
Hmm.
would be your three top tips on
Yeah.
what's most important to look at?
Sure. So I think when you're in proper relationship to food, it is a source of energy. And as you learn to eat cleaner and healthier, and you learn to feel and understand the unique needs of your body, you learn the food that gives you the most energy and optimizes your body on that level. When you find yourself reaching for food for emotional reasons or addictive reasons, it's a different thing. And being able to delineate the difference. One of the questions that I pose to people is to ask themselves when they're about to reach for the cookie or the cake or the whatever, the wine, they ask themselves, what am I truly hungry for? What am I truly hungry for? Am I, especially if you're like not hungry, you're just opening the refrigerator in the middle of the day, maybe it's the third time you've done it in the evening, you've already eaten, you're not hungry. But what are you hungry for? What are you really looking for? And if you're able to ask yourself that question and give yourself the next tip is the pause or the stillness, just a moment to actually drop in and get the answer. You know, your body knows the answer, your spirit knows the answer, but if you're just going, you're lost in that static and you're not going to get the answer. If you pose a question to your mind body, you'll get an answer if you can get still. And so you'll hear it. Maybe you need to nurture yourself more with physical exercise. Maybe you need a hug. Maybe you need to tell someone about your day. Maybe you need more, your love life is on the rocks, or your husband or partner, there's issues you're not dealing with. It's always something. What are you truly hungry for? Connection, etc. So to ask yourself what you're truly hungry for. 2, to pause and get the answer. And then 3, to then go and focus on the primary food, the true nourishment. It's not necessarily about the green juice or the vegan or the gluten-free or the whatever the fad is, paleo, what have you. It's about, okay, no, I need to go connect. I need to go have a talk with my partner. I need to go have some self-care. I need to call a friend. I need a hug. And do that, and you'll notice that things tend to go into balance.
Yeah, totally. Actually, just today, I was feeling like I was asking myself that very same question. I was like, I'm feeling like I'm hungry for something, but I know it's not food. And I was like, you know what? I know what I need. I called my friend because I work from home and I'm alone a lot of the time. And I called my friend and I just said, hey, can I have a virtual hug? He's like, okay, sure, whatever. And
Aw,
on the phone, it was just like 2 minutes of silence. All right, thanks. Thank you. Love you. Bye. That
aw,
was
that's
like it.
awesome. Virtual hugs.
Yes,
Yay.
yeah. No, I mean, honestly, that's really all I wanted. I just
Yeah.
wanted that kind of acknowledgement. It's like, okay, cool, that stopped me from probably going and eating a bag of coconut chips, which I can down a lot of those because they're easy and tasty and they are pretty healthy, but still, it would be the wrong reason to do something. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Great. There you go. It's in practice.
It is. And so
It's
I'm
awesome.
still learning. I'm still growing. And it's
Oh,
like
me too.
it's okay to not be perfected and to not feel like the goal isn't to be this perfect healed being. It's to be perfectly you, really. And
I love
honest
that.
with that. Just show up that
Yeah.
way. So,
Oh, yeah. Totally.
yeah, but
That's so good. I love
thank
it.
you so much for coming on and talking and also sharing resources that you can find at Behive of Healing. What's the website? We'll put it down below, but can you
Yeah.
tell us?
Sure, it's
Yeah,
Beehive of Healing, and it's B spelled with one E,
right.
beehiveofhealing.com, and there's plenty of information on all of our amazing services, wellness services, in addition to leading edge integrative medical services, and we'd love to see you at your sweet Behive of Healing.
Yeah, and also there's a lot of blogs and just free resources that you can check out. They've got a magazine, all this stuff that you can find out, but it's really cool.
Yeah. Yes.
So thank you so much again, and I'm so glad I got to talk to you today.
Thank you, Jamie. It's an honor to be of service.
Yes, much love.